Joining us now is Ben Burgis. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, Snag a Copy. Check out his Patreon page. Join it. You can hear him regularly on the David Feldman Show, and he's also co-host of the very good Dead Pundits Society. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, brother. How are you?
I'm hanging in, man. I'm working on it.
Yeah, I did get a chance. I only was able to listen to part of the first half, but I did catch the thing about Castro's guerrillas coming down from the Sierra Madre and being called the bearded ones. I liked that very much.
That's awesome. I love it. So, Ben, you do a segment with us called The Debunk. What are we debunking this evening?
Well, tonight we are looking at the Ayn Rand Institute, which recently made a surprising funding decision. I believe we've got the video of their explanation of it.
Oh yeah. One sec. Sorry, let's turn the sound on.
Ayn Rand Institute is a Dave Rubin partner, we should say.
Of
course it is.
Offers to return some of the money taken from us by force.
Yeah, I think you have to set it up a bit.
Yeah, all right. So the Ayn Rand Institute, which we just heard, is a Dave Rubin partner. Personally, I'd like the Joe Rogan Institute to explain the importance of the post office, do educational things like that. But in any case, it's a far-right libertarian organization. They believe all the standard libertarian things about how the welfare state is bad and economic redistribution is bad and all of the wealth should stay exactly where it is no matter what, which in turn makes, I think, what you're about to see explained here at the beginning of this video that much more surprising.
Hi, I'm Tal Safani, the president and CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. So social media is on fire because my institute, which advocates for laissez-faire capitalism and the complete separation of the government from the economy, was suddenly exposed as receiving money from the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP as it's called. Except that this wasn't a big revelation at all. Way back in April and May, we broadcasted an hour-long webinar and published an article stating clearly that we were applying for the PPP money and explaining why we, as uncompromising opponents of the government wealth redistribution, absolutely have a right to take the money as a matter of moral principle. This might seem completely counterintuitive to you, and that's understandable. If I learned anything in my days as an engineer, is that intuition can often lead you to the wrong conclusions. So what are the issues involved here in this matter? First, let me just say that if you're interested in this question and watching this video, that means you're interested in a moral question, and that's good. So you care about doing the right thing.
Sorry, pause it.
Many people don't.
On some level, I'm not going to belabor this or have a pity party, but I'm not having the easiest of times. And you make me sit through this tonight, Ben. All right, go ahead. Jesus Christ.
All of us are forced to pay into a tax system whether we morally support it or oppose it. We don't have a choice about that. You, me, the employees, and the supporters of the Ayn Rand Institute, all of us are forced to support the welfare state whether we agree with it or not. If the government offers to return some of the money taken from us by force, each of us is entitled to reclaim some of what was taken. This is a form of restitution, like reclaiming.
All right. So I do want to formally apologize for the emotional violence of making everybody watch this. So that's the core of the argument. It goes on for another couple minutes, and they also put out an article. And as you said, they put out a bunch of stuff about this earlier. I guess they realized that people would be a little unclear about the consistency of this, and so they thought they'd get out ahead of it. So his argument is, in its basics, that everybody has to pay taxes, which of course they see as a horrible thing, as theft. And therefore, since they have to pay taxes like everybody else, then it's restitution. That's the word he used. It's like as if they were reclaiming stolen property when they get $1 million from the Paycheck Protection program to fund the jobs of people who are literally paid to have opinions about why poor people are lazy. All right. And so one obvious thing to say about this is that even on its own terms, like if you accept all of the bizarro premises of these people's, vivid imagination life, then this is still a little weird, right? This, like, if you're saying there's like a riot going on and people are smashing windows and looting, and somebody smashed your window and they took a couple things, so therefore you have a moral right to take absolutely anything that was looted from another place that's given to you. I think even in libertarian terms, that one's a little funny. On a second level, you'd think, all right, so even aside from the question of whether paying into this makes it okay to accept it, even though they normally think that people who accept government aid are parasites, right? That's a word that Ayn Rand was very fond of.
Yeah.
Even if you believe that, there's also an issue of fraud here, because I would think if there's any job that you could do in the comfort and privacy of your own home with a Zoom hookup on your employer-provided laptop, it would be having opinions about why rich people should get to keep their money.
You can just Zoom.
Yeah, literally, there's nothing about this job that everybody involved couldn't do for home. So above and beyond anything else, this is just a bizarre cronyistic handout. But then I think the most interesting thing about this is, let's say we accept the principle that, all right, normally redistribution is bad unless the government did something bad to you in the past, in which case redistribution is okay, because now it's restitution.
When is the Ayn Rand Institute for Reparations getting started?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It would be fascinating to think about what other situations you could extend this line of reasoning to.
Yeah.
So, for example, I don't know if the guy in the video or Yard Brooke or any of the other people who work for the Ayn Rand Institute are aware of this, but the ancestors of African Americans today were actually arguably worse than paying a small percentage of their income as taxes. Were literally...
I know that's quite an argument to make, but might have even been worse than paying an income tax. Maybe.
Yeah.
Just bear with us. Just stipulate that that's potentially true.
Obviously, it's hard to imagine anything worse than that. But if you could possibly, multi-generational hereditary slavery might be worse.
Might be worse, even for libertarians, maybe.
And then you think, all right, we've got this, that since emancipation, there's been this obvious economic disparity between Black and white Americans. That's a result of something I think even they would concede is unjust, and was certainly enforced by government at the time. In fact, a government was created specifically to defend that practice that existed for 4 years. So, hey, you might think you get some reparations there. Or, for example, they might be fascinated to learn that the land at which, whatever in-person offices the Ayn Rand Institute might have, when it's safe to go to work face-to-face, was not always occupied by white people. There was this whole other group of people that used to occupy that, and force was used by governments to prevent them from continuing to occupy that land.
So I've actually heard from one libertarian that it was incredible, because this was an amazing twofer. There was some acknowledgement, although obviously they don't want to go anywhere with it, but there was an conceptual acknowledgement of the case for reparations to the descendants of slaves. And you're like, okay. And then that was quickly followed up by the obvious point you're adding on, which is the settler colonialist genocide of Native Americans. And then this gentleman's response was basically that, I'm trying to remember. I don't remember. But basically, I don't remember. Maybe this is, anyway, it doesn't matter who said it. The follow-up was that that didn't really count because Native Americans didn't conceive of property in the same way. So like, yes, it was like a mean thing to do and it shouldn't have been done, but that's not implicated by the same contractual arrangements. That was just sort of like, genocide, super mean, but also cannot get into a property conversation because like it wasn't really their property to begin with because they didn't have like contract law. So. Yeah,
well, that seems legitimate.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, to be fair, right? Because I don't want anybody from the Ayn Rand Institute thinking that we distorted their thinking. Rand herself did grapple with this issue. She did in pretty much the same way as the person you were just quoted. This is from a Q&A in 1974. Americans didn't conquer. The Indians did not have any property rights because they didn't have the concept of property. They didn't have any rights to the land. Let's suppose they were all beautifully innocent savages, which they certainly were not. What was it they're supposed to be fighting for if they opposed white men on this continent for their wish to continue a primitive existence? Their right to keep part of the earth untouched, unused, and not even as property, but just keep everybody out of it so you will live practically like an animal, Rand said. All right, so that doesn't seem great, but you might think, all right, well that's all about America, but at least this would allow you to firmly oppose any kind of redistribution from haves and have-nots and in the old world in Europe, which is also interesting because if you look at that history, you had something called enclosure, whereby peasants were forced off their land by, again, acts of government, so that they would have to be labor, be forced into a position where there'd be labor for early capitalist factories. And this is pretty much the pattern in one way or another all over the world. You don't actually have
to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And yeah, I mean, like, you look at places in South America where, you're continuing to have, expropriation,
Yep.
of indigenous groups, landless peasant movements, various places around the world. Pretty much there's nowhere where the starting point of capitalism, as far as I know, anybody who has a counterexample, should feel free to pass it on. But far as I know, there are no countries where the origin story for modern capitalism was that everybody started out with an equal share of society's wealth, and then you just kind of had one big game of Monopoly, until you had what we have right now.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it always occurs to me with libertarians that what's hilarious is that their worldview is positive and posited on basically achieving a level of utopian communism, which frankly, like, I'm sorry, I don't think is ever going to be achievable. Like, we can make massive strides and dents in society. We can get rid of a huge amount of preventable suffering. We could have infinitely more equity and power, but we're never going to just be like, I think, just there's zero property. There's zero, like, everything is a giant, like, techno commune. I don't think that that's where we're ever going to be. But what's hilarious is that libertarianism basically posits that, like, we have achieved that at some, like, there is a state of absolute communitarian perfection with complete equal distribution. And then human beings just collectively decide to create just like a fucking nightmare for themselves. Like, that's like the funny thing. It's just sort of like, we've achieved this thing that even the most optimistic among us don't think we can ever achieve. And then, and again, of course, like, I think one of the reasons we'll never have a perpetual paradise is there's always going to be human problems and conflict and so on. But I don't think that people in that situation would be like, what'd be fucking awesome is if we went from complete abundance to actually a lot of us didn't have the basic necessities of life. And then there was a handful of companies that could even own our genetic code. might be really fucking cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because if you assume, right, like if you read libertarian philosophers like Robert Nozick, talks about how you could have property rights that emerged from the sort of thing that you're describing, that you just have a bunch of unclaimed land and people kind of homestead on it. It goes from there. But of course, nobody actually claims that that's what happened. So it seems to me that you've either got to grant that, okay, maybe, either the history matters or it doesn't, right? If the history matters, then, and bad things that have been done to people, coercive, oppressive things that have been done to people in the past, entitle them to restitution now, then it's pretty much game over for any kind of libertarian worldview, because all of the distribution of wealth in the world today is inextricably linked with all kinds of historical chains of dispossession, of exploitation. The history of the world is just full of this stuff, and even when like individual businesses didn't necessarily start from anything objectionable in their origin story or whatever, this certainly started from a world where who had the seed money, etc. What the circumstances were, what the market was all dictated by those things. On the other hand, right, if the history doesn't matter, right? If it doesn't matter what the origin story is of the current distribution of wealth, then the Ayn Rand Institute should not, in fact, be holding out its hand for $1 million of taxpayer money.
Right. History matters, or you give back to PPE. I just want to say real quick, someone is requesting an interview with someone who can refute these bullshit right-wing claims that tribal peoples didn't have a concept of property. I get sick and tired of libertarians using arguments literally from extermination policy period of the 1830s. I mean, that is exactly what it is. That is where these arguments come from. And that's exactly right. I mean, of course, every society has a concept of property and differentiation. Right. And that's actually one of the reasons that I don't, believe in these kind of like mass block utopian concepts. Like there's a pretty extraordinary book called Tribal Millennium by an anthropologist, a late anthropologist at Harvard, who was involved in some of the Survival International work, which was, I think, is very good work, because it really was just focused on just autonomy. It was not, he worked in a lot of different communities. He had a lot of respect, and he really could expose the complexity of different cultures, but it was not racist and demonizing. It also wasn't romantic crap. It was just like, this is a society. It's fully fleshed out. It has these attributes. It has these, advantages, these drawbacks. And the bottom line is that no economy, no nation state should terrorize these people out of living the lives they see fit. And I am 1,000% on board with that kind of politics and think it's an extremely important issue. And anyways, at any rate, the idea that just because you don't have, that you didn't have a sort of civilizational point where somebody wearing a wig scrolled something on parchment, that you didn't have a societal concept of either individual, collective, communitarian ownership. In some ways, actually, especially when you get to some of the ecological stuff, which is there. Yeah. If somebody can identify every single plant species and animal that you're cohabitating with inside a 20-mile region or a 100-mile region, I would suggest that that's a much higher sense of ownership than, colonial parchment. So yeah,
absolutely. Well, it's also like if a written constitution and a law code that's not just like customary, because if that's good enough, then various Native American groups certainly had that, right? But like right. that's explicit in written documents. If that's the requirement, then gosh, it's sure lucky that nobody invaded Europe and dispossessed Europeans more than a few hundred years ago, because then none of our ancestors would have qualified for property rights either.
Word. Ben Burgis, appreciate you always, brother. Stay safe. Be well. Take care.
Thank you, Mike.
You just watched a Michael Brooks Show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.